Good morning and welcome to the channel. I'm Brian Lusk. Thank you very much for joining me today. We're just getting the stream fired up here. I hope things are I'm not too far out of context, but we're getting things rolling. Should be a pretty straightforward stream today. Don't want to get a whole lot of crazy things going on all at once. Yes, that's my warning that I've just gone live and I need to remember to turn that off next time. Oh man. Okay, so we got some updates on the Ukraine war. As a reminder, I do these when I've got other assignments that are keeping me away from doing a full Ukraine update video, just to keep things interesting and exciting. Actually, more just to keep things up to date, because I do want to keep up to date on what's going on in the Ukraine war. I find it to be important, so I want to make sure that that everybody else is as informed as I can make it for them. I am kind of just talking for a little bit here until till things are kind of settled in for the stream. We don't want to we'll want to give people a chance to jump in if they can and maybe start commenting. But either way, I'm going to go ahead and get started now. So we're going to start off with something theoretical. And again, this is just a reminder that what I'm going to be talking is theoretical for a little bit, not actual what's going on the front. So what we have here is, there we go, a theoretical. If what would happen, basically, are we looking at a situation where Ukraine could actually invade across the Dnieper River and make an actual go of making a full-on front about it? Now, there have been infiltrations around Podstepna, Poima, and Krinky that have been ongoing. The Russians have been trying to counter them and so far have not been able to effectively do so. The one in Krinky is the one that's apparently most dug in. The ones in Podstepna, Poima, and what was the other one? There's another village in that area, which I'm not remembering right now, but in the Poima, Podstepna area right there, that's a little bit more dynamic going on. But either way, this is a lot of back and forth. So from a current standpoint, it's a very busy part of the front. Now, from looking at this more theoretically, is Lovely Lad. Basically, he's gone through the open source available information, and he's come up with his thoughts on the likelihood of it happening. And he thinks it's getting more and more likely. Now, the way all the maps look, it looks like there's a lot of Russian equipment in this area. However, Russia's primarily been using this area as kind of basically a place where units can regenerate. Almost behind the lines. Not they're still in contact with the enemy on a regular basis, but at a much lower intensity level compared to other areas of the front, like Verbova, Avdiivka, Kupiansk, those areas. So they have put partial units there, units that are still being put back together, new units that really need some time to get their stuff together. The closest analog I can think of just off the top of my head would be in World War II, right before the Battle of the Bulge. There was an entire American-controlled segment of the lines that was primarily newly arrived personnel and those that were kind of reconstituting, much like what we're seeing on the edge of the Dnieper here. And that's when the Germans attacked through that area where they thought there was no effective way for the Germans to put a significant assault force through that part of the front. Of course, the Germans were at the very end of World War II at the time, so they did not have the resources to sustain an offensive through that area. And of course, the strategic situation meant that even though they punched through the lines, they end up being hamstrung by a lack of fuel, by the tenacious, dogged defense of the Americans and the British and the French, all those people in that area. So it's not like this was a one trick pony here. There was a bunch of people there that even if they were new on the front or reconstituting and then surrounded by relatively green troops, they were still able to effectively resist. And some of the greatest stories of bravery have come out of the Battle of the Bulge, merely from the nature of the combat that took place there. So that's kind of the analog I can think of. In World War II, the Americans and the British managed to put together a counter and pull things together once they could get air support in there. But the tenacious, dogged defense in that area is what made it so that the Germans could not push through to their final objectives. We are looking at a different situation here. We're looking at a very lightly defended part of the front, right along the Dnieper River, and these units are reconstituting. They're not full strength. They're not even new units, although some might be newly developed units. Or as he puts it right here, they're showing a lot of mechanized forces in this area, and yet they are really just motorized units, as in they have civilian cars and trucks. Urals trucks, BTRs if they're getting a little bit heavier, and MTLBs. There are some mechanized units with BMP-1s, BMP-2s, and BMP-3s. And there are a few armored units with T-62s and T-55s and T-54s, and a single T-90M company, which may be, in fact, under strength in the area. So we've got a situation where you've got lightly armed, lightly armored troops that are having to defend against a lot of that will have to defend against whatever Ukraine brings to the fight. Right now, Ukraine is bringing to the fight lightly armed, lightly armored troops, a lot of drones, and a lot of artillery. But let's continue on. There have been a lot of territorial units that have been formed in that area, which are most likely understrength and underprepared. So a lot of these are brand new companies, as you can see right here from the chart that lovely lad made. The overall situation then ends up being, hang on a second, there we go. I am watching the chat. There we go. My computer apparently didn't put the chat up initially. So if you're on, feel free to let me know you're here. And, ask questions if you've got them. Right now, we're talking theoretical situation here about Kherson front. Okay, so these are newly constituted groups, which means they are not really prepared for combat like, say, somebody just coming off the lines near Novoprokopivka would be. They would be battle-hardened troops with whatever they had left. There is the battered 40th Army Corps, some Arctic troops, and some other random regiments that are there for restoration. And so they're under strength, and they'll need to be fully reconstituted before they can become fully battle effective. Even so, these are the dangerous troops. The typical newly mobilized or newly made units are going to be tremendously unprepared for combat compared. So the lovely lad talks about this being an area where the units refit and restore their strength. And the Ukrainians have been destroying some of the training camps in this area as well. Thank you, Janice. I'm glad to have you here. Appreciate you joining in right now. We're just kind of getting started here, and right now we're talking theoretical stuff, not actually what's going on in the front, though it's partially related. So then we get to what's going to happen here. Well, this is a river crossing, so there's your biggest issue, the river. And the ground in that area is swampy and yucky, and there's very few places that are actually suitable to put vehicles across, which is Ukraine's challenge. They could wait for the ground to freeze, they could wait for the river to freeze over as well, but the truth is that depends on factors that Ukraine and Russia cannot control. So if they wait for that, it's basically just saying we've got to wait for divine intervention. So there are a couple of places where they could put some pontoon bridges or tie into existing infrastructure pretty neatly, all of them in areas where bridges have been destroyed. So that makes the biggest vulnerability of any offensive that would go across here would be these very much well-known positions and then Russian aviation taking them out. So in order to make this all really work, they would need to have amphibious capabilities extensively. Now Ukraine has been developing those capabilities. They're putting it together. They probably have enough right now to successfully perform a crossing and sustain it with a large number of troops and some equipment. It's just, is this the right time, the right moment, and what are the tactical challenges they have? So if an amphibious vehicle does manage to cross, they'd want to rush the main urban centers because the Russian armored assets will lose a lot of their advantages in that area. Even though their primary armored assets are things like T-55s, T-62s, and a small company of understrength T-90s, they would still, in an urban environment, lose many of their advantages. They are still way outweighing anything that Ukraine could easily put across in bulk, in quantity, to start with. Russian air power is a big advantage for them in this area, and they would have to reduce that or eliminate it in order to do that with preemptive strikes on airfields and the bases that operate in this area. There's also the concentrating electronic warfare and air defense near the landing in order to halt the drone attacks that could possibly take place. But right here in this area, Ukraine's got enough advantages going for them that they've already got some serious suppression of enemy air defense and destruction of enemy air defense going on. So the Ukrainian jets are mostly able to operate not with impunity, but at a much lower risk level in the Kherson direction. There's potential for special operations forces, which, I mean, there's no point in even talking about that just because that's way theoretical. Jamming of communications and defense radars. It would be, if they're going to create a front at Kherson, they would have to destroy Russian air assets, jam their communications, and then prepare for extensive deployments behind the lines so that they could keep the frontline Russian units in this area tied up while a full crossing takes place. That includes putting up pontoon bridges, crossing equipment, and getting that equipment into places where it cannot be easily destroyed. So that's the long story short about what it would take to create a front at Kherson. Not easy, but it is certainly a possibility. Now let's go past that into the actual news. We're going to talk about Ukraine news for a bit here. I've got about 2-ish days worth of information here. If you have not seen the video on Geopolitics Daily, that is a kind of a catch-up video getting up to date on what's going on in Ukraine for basically the previous week. So absolutely jump over there and take a look at that. If you've got the time, and hit that with a thumbs up and all that kind of stuff, because that's the bread and butter over there. This is just me doing things to make sure that the information's getting out there. Let's see. Talking about Ukraine. Now, a lot of this is not as orderly as it might normally be. Let's just go ahead and go through it. There is basically a demand that Vladimir Putin must stand trial. That's going to be one of their key points of their peace plan. However, I'm going to just state in my opinion that that's going to have to be the negotiable one. If there is no situation in which Russia surrenders or Russia pulls out voluntarily and doesn't escalate the combat, as long as Vladimir Putin's personal situation is directly threatened in such a way. So while it is part of the peace plan, it's one of the areas that I think that will have to be negotiated out to actually have a peace plan work. If otherwise, this is basically going to become a cold conflict once Ukraine takes all of their territory, and Russia will have to try and justify things. Hi, Phil. Glad to have you aboard. Hope your things are going well for you. Let me know how you're doing. I'm having an awesome day. So that's my thoughts on the Putin must stand trial. I think he should. I think it's a part that's going to have to be negotiated, potentially. Depends on how it ends, if you know what I'm saying. Let's see. I can pop this up a couple steps, can't I? All right. There we go. Yes, that's very nice. There was, this is about 2 days ago as well, and this is still an ongoing situation, though my understanding is that since then the Black Sea grain corridor has reopened again. But 2 days ago, Russian aircraft started flying over the Ukraine-endorsed Black Sea corridor, dropping naval mines. Hi, Phil's youngest. Glad to see you here. Always glad to have people on board, even the little kids. I remember when my kids were that age. So they've been dropping basically naval mines into their Black Sea corridor to try and prevent them from using it. Ukraine is working on increasing their ammunition production in the future through both state and private enterprises. Absolutely good for Ukraine because they're going to have to be able to provide for their own needs there. You got some older boys too. My oldest two. Well, let's see. Hold on. My oldest three kids are all adults now. Wow, I'm starting to feel a little bit old, just a touch. Okay, let's see. Talking about hitting infrastructure in Ukraine. Russia's going to do it again. Talking about using high precision things like calibers, but there's been a pause in Russia's significant use of caliber missiles and other similar precision strike instruments. Basically, we're almost on a month without them using any significant amounts of these types of guided munitions. And as it looks like they're stocking up. They're holding onto their stockpile, and so they can do a massive initial strike at a time they choose to actually make it the most damaging. But we'll have to see how that works. We'll have to see how that works out, because the Ukraine of winter 2023 is not the Ukraine of winter 2022. There is air defense in place that is far above what they had back then. That said, there's still things getting through, and I expect there will be things get through, and therefore it's always a challenge. The way I've heard it, Yanis, I think it is the way I've heard it and the way I've said it is that getting old is not for the faint of heart. Now, Ukraine's national bank has reduced their interest rates from 20% to 16%. That's an indication that Ukraine's economy is getting better. Now, that's still a higher interest rate than Russia, which just bumped theirs from 13 to 15. But Russia's a much larger economy, and they didn't take the hits that Ukraine did. So the Ukrainian economy is improving. It's got a long way to go. Let's see, make sure, I want to check. There we go. It's still looking good. An enemy intelligence group was exposed in Sumy Oblast. These are basically an intelligence and somebody that's basically informing on the Ukrainians' movements in Sumy, which is on the north end of Ukraine. We're basically trying to scout out targets for Russian artillery and Russian airstrikes. So they found this group in the Sumy Oblast, and they are actually facing life imprisonment. Sometimes we look at the potential punishments for some of these things, and they look so small. Not this one. This one's got the full enchilada on it. Well, you know, about Ukraine's economy, it's not doing bad, relatively speaking. Again, if you look at the 2021 numbers and look at the 2022 numbers, you're like, oh my heavens, that's horrendous, because it is. They got invaded. Their economy went straight into the toilet. But comparing the 2023 numbers to the 2022 numbers, you see an arc. It starts moving upwards and back into getting into a good economic state. No country at war is exactly having a wonderful economic time. but they are working on it, and they're definitely putting the partnerships together to successfully rebuild after the war and to engage in the economic growth they need to successfully move this war forward for Ukraine. That said, and I don't think I've got the article here, Russia has been tripling the amount of war material production facilities they've got. They've been basically bumping up all the factories they can. Their biggest problem right now is not having enough manpower to man all the things they're trying to build weapons of war, because all that manpower either ran out of the country or is getting on the front lines in Ukraine. So it's interesting to see. And the thing is that from a hindsight is 2020 perspective, if Ukraine had received a whole lot of assistance early on, it would have changed the character of the ongoing conflict in immeasurable ways, because they would have been able to effectively destroy early on equipment that is just now becoming getting destroyed. Would have been a whole lot less losses if they'd been able to go through all of those changes. Okay, I guess I'm not going to sneeze after all. Speaking of Ukraine's economy, though, we do see some of their largest retailers coming back and reopening. They're returning even to the front line areas where they can be reasonably assured that they'll still be able to operate no matter what's going on the front lines, as long as Ukraine is continuing to fight like they are now. So awesome. This one's interesting right here because there's been a lot of people who have complained about Ukraine having corruption and Ukraine having issues like that. As things have continued through this war, the Ukrainians' trust in their government has increased. 73% trust the president, 54% trust the government. Compare that to U.S. numbers. I guarantee you that there's not 73% trusting the president of the United States. Last numbers I saw, which has been a while here, 45%, and I think those polls are rigged. I don't think Biden has 45% approval rating. I've seen it drop in some polls as low as into the low 30s. So that's just, and of course, Congress by itself has got a favorability rating somewhere between 10 and 20%, in the teens on a good day. 49 and 51% of Ukrainians trust their regional and local authorities. They have got far more trust in their government than we do in ours in the United States. At least right now. That was not the case just 2 years ago. Ukraine increasing domestic ammunition production, as we said before. This is the temporary closure of the grain corridor, but there's still several ships moving along it as of yesterday. So things are still moving, and they're still getting stuff out of there. Now, Phil, I can't speak to the Canadian government. My understand I have an external perspective, and don't have the real details on Canada. Is that Canada's maybe a little bit better than us in the U.S. as far as trusting our government, but from everything I'm seeing, they're not exactly happy with Trudeau or any of those things on the whole. But that's just from what I'm seeing from an external perspective. The new temporary closed grain corridor. A lot of these things I grabbed multiple copies of. This is the one that tells me about the unknown explosive devices into the Black Sea along this route of civilian shipping. So this grain corridor here, they're going to have to keep clearing it and watching where the airplanes are. They reported 2 days ago that there were 35 airborne weapons dropped from Russian planes. Speaking of explosive things, Ukraine reports removing 12,000 explosive objects since the beginning of October. That is a lot of mines, bombs, just all the things that they're having to do just to keep their country relatively safe. This one is going to be one that's just a touch controversial. If you are a Tucker Carlson fan, he had a segment recently he did talking about how awful it was that Joe Biden was supporting the Ukrainian government as it throws priests into jail. But I've read many sources on this, and I've been following up on it. These priests are part of the Russian Orthodox Church, and some of them of the Russian Orthodox affiliated Ukrainian Orthodox Church, as I recall it being called. There's a bunch of different things there. They're part of the FSB. They're part of Russia's intelligence apparatus. So they aren't throwing priests into prison. They're throwing spies into prison. They're throwing intelligence sources into prison. They're throwing potential combatants into prison because they don't want them spying on their country. It's not a church. It's an intelligence organization. From everything I've been able to read since I've started really getting serious about what's going on in Ukraine, that's the situation. And this is just, misinformation. Now, Tucker Carlson has not been in favor of the Ukraine war ever, so I don't expect that to change. He's got Viktor Orban as a confidant, for heaven's sakes. But at least we can address that this information is wrong. Even if you just say it has nuance, that still doesn't make it this black and white situation that Tucker Carlson has portrayed it as. There are a lot of other things I can support that Tucker Carlson has said in the past, but this is definitely not one of them. And there we go. Oh, gee, that's hilarious. And the thing is that, again, it depends on when you look at what he says. We'll just put it that way. All right, so let's go look at some news in Russia. What was I looking at on this one? Okay, there we go. Speaking of church stuff real fast, the Kremlin's support for ultra-nationalist Russian Orthodox religion and ideology appears to be complicating the Chechen Republic head Ramzan Kadyrov's ability to balance appealing to his Chechen Muslims and keeping in the Kremlin's favor. This is one of the polls that's going on right here. One of the weak spots in the Russian government as it stands right now. Kadyrov, Muslim, is trying to appeal to both sides. And recently, with all the rumors that have been popping around about, Vladimir Putin's dead, which, again, I don't trust any of those rumors until I see the body being put into a casket and then wandered down the main streets of the outside the Kremlin to show that he's dead. But he's trying to be in that position where things are going to go Ramzan Kadyrov's way. In fact, I caught something else that said that the hardware that had been confiscated from Wagner was being moved to Chechnya, to that area, and given to the Chechens instead. I'm not sure that's going to pay off the way that Putin thinks it will, but that's where it's going. Then again, maybe they're using it to put down, shall we say, rebellions among the Chechens. Don't know. I read this one the other day, so I'm going to quickly kind of go through it. I don't remember enough about it to talk about it off the top of my head the same way I do a lot of these things. But there's a lot of this is a comparison of what the Russians are searching for on the internet versus what they're saying in their public polling about their views about the war in Ukraine. And it definitely paints a different picture. Opinion polls say that, let's try that again. Opinion polls in Russia, by and large, say that there is broad support for the war, that the real concerns they're having are economic and financial, and the social impacts thereof. Understand that the Russians pretty much try and hide away any injuries or casualties that were happening in the special military operation. A guy returns from the war and with his leg cut off, and they try and make him disappear. They want to be seen as having entirely able-bodied people in Russia. The 55% show that they're still in favor of the war continuing, but a fifth of them did decline to respond. This is kind of funny right here. One participant who declined to answer questions about the war said, "Thank you for the opportunity not to testify against myself," which should tell you what they expect in Russia. Now, the Insider, which is an independent Russian news site, which I use on a regular basis because they actually put out some pretty excellent articles. Of course, I usually end up having to translate them from Russian to English with Google Translate, so that's fun. But their searches on the internet are a better indication of how they feel about the war. The Russians prefer the search term war in Ukraine rather than special military operation, which tells you that they're seeing it for what it really is. They are increasingly looking up who is losing versus who is winning, and there's more searches for peace agreement or negotiations. It tells you which way they think it's going. There's been a huge surge in fortune teller searches, looking for online fortune tellers, wizards, seers, and all those types of predictive charlatans for predictions, as they say. And that they've always been a rather superstitious country as a whole. This has gone way up as things have continued on. There was a bunch of questions about drones, asking about what was going on that situation. And the drones have become an effective way to draw attention to the war, as a significant share of the population takes an interest in these events only when directly affected. Let's see, and that would be the 1,000 rubles per minute to talk to Madam, not Cleo. What would be the Russian equivalent of Madam Cleo? A lot of searches about who actually started the special military operation / war, and then asking right after that, why did we attack? As in, why did the Russians attack? So they don't understand the basics of the war. Searches about helping the Russian military are low as a total percentage of the totals. So they don't want to know how to get in. They mostly want to know how to get out. Now, here's an interesting one here. While the most common searches relate to the normal activities of the Russian president or general biographical information or his latest statements, there are other questions that have been surging during the war, like, where is Putin? The search about the Prigozhin mutiny. And then, why does Putin need Ukraine? So overall, we're seeing a situation where, while they're publicly saying one thing, their internet searches are indicating a different route for them to be going in their heads for the carrying out of the special military operation. Now, this is an interesting one. Now that there's been the first indications of ATACMS hitting, the Russians are now scrambling to move their equipment out of ATACMS range, dispersing it farther, moving it underground or deeper behind the lines, anything to keep that from being an issue. But there's also another problem, and that is partisans. The partisans that Elon Musk said weren't there. So the partisans are identifying targets, taking them out themselves at times, or calling in an appropriate strike for ATACMS or Storm Shadow to take out significant concentrations of Russian equipment. And so as they do so, as they continue to make these efforts here, the Russians are having to move their stuff farther and farther back. They're having to hide their military equipment. They're having to avoid getting into large concentrations, like earlier in the war when there was that one general who had their entire command standing in formation for hours until they decided to come out and give their speech. And that was just the right time for a HIMARS strike. So the concentrations of equipment are getting spread out. They're trying to quickly load up on trains and at night to get everything to the front. Everything is trying to avoid a situation where there is a high value target in one position. So it's interesting to see them change their mentality and their direction and how they're doing things. And as they do, we find that they're just basically having to do even more to try and avoid getting killed. Logistics are moving farther east, according to the mayor of Melitopol, and they're trying to get farther out of now ATACMS range. Every step they do, every expansion of the range that Ukraine gets means one more step they have to move farther back, one more complication for logistics. In fact, I saw they were doing some upgrades to, I don't remember which one, if it was ATACMS or the HIMARS, where they were able to reprogram it in flight and change its targeting point. And they could do that right up until just before it hits, making it possible to hit moving targets with these types of ATACMS and HIMARS. Let's see. Ukraine's main director of intelligence reports the destruction of 4 FSB officers in temporarily occupied Berdyansk. This, as I recall, was a vehicle bomb. They destroyed a vehicle with 4 FSB officers, one of which was known to torture locals. Now, we've all seen by now the 1,000, cargo containers with North Korean munitions, the ones that Russia say don't actually exist. But what we don't know is what Russia offered in return for a huge amount of hardware like this. This is going to become significant because, let me see if I can find it real quick. It was relatively recent. Kim Jong-un out of North Korea has said that the Third World War is about to start due to escalation in the Middle East, and everyone should be ready for it. He just gave up a whole lot of his own hardware to Russia. So, what's his game plan here? It's really interesting here, and if he's getting what he considers better technology than what he gave up, which was basically old school equipment, he's looking at a future that we're all seeing happening here. Moving on, Russia has retested their large-scale retaliatory nuclear strike using ground, sea, and air components. In other words, they busted out one of their missiles and made sure it actually flew. They didn't actually fly it with a nuclear warhead, but still, it's making sure their equipment still works. There was at least some naval assets went and paid a visit to North Korea. I don't remember if it was a sub or not, but absolutely that would be a fast way to get that tech down there, hand off a few things for them to look over and try and copy. Russian state media claimed that they shot down 2 ATACMS missiles. That's an entertaining statement there. Let's see if I can find the rest of this. It's in here somewhere because, like I said, I've got a bunch of stuff here. Okay, there it is. After they said they shot down 2 missiles for 24 hours, they came back and said, well, they actually destroyed 2 ATACMS missiles with 3 of their S-400 launchers. So, as we call that, it's called hitting the target. There was no shoot down of ATACMS missiles. There never was. They just literally destroyed their targets, and they said that they destroyed that they shot them down instead. Crazy, crazy. You know, if they just be honest on a regular basis, we would have less reason to distrust them. I mean, honest to goodness, oftentimes the truth would be better for Russia than any number of lies. But at this point, according to them, they've shot down the Russian Air Force, the Ukrainian Air Force, 4 times over? They've destroyed more HIMARS launchers than were ever given to Ukraine. If they'd stop lying, the reality would actually be better for them. If they tell us that. There was a potential explosion of a Russian minesweeper. Now, this situation's a little bit murky here, so I'm just going to give you the kind of the high-level overview. The Ukrainians are basically saying they're not confirming or denying that something may have happened, but there's a reported explosion on a minesweeping ship. Oh my, I didn't even translate that one. Okay, we're going to come back to you in a moment because I think there's more on this. Okay, so the ship suddenly exploded in the outer roadstead of Sevastopol Bay, before which it had been slowly turning circles for the last few days. The smoke was reported coming from the engine room, and a tugboat towed it in. There was a reported dull explosion in the time frame, so that's kind of what we know at this point. And more fake airplanes being painted on airfields in Russian airfields. They're trying to fake out drones and things like that, have something that looks like a plane and have it hit nothing. But I don't think anybody's really being fooled by this. There's been reports that the Russians are preparing an information attack against Minister of Defense Rustem Umerov. They're trying to put out the story that he is corrupt and selling Ukrainian weapons to Hamas terrorists. They've already floated that trial balloon with a short video of somebody saying in Arabic, "Thanks for the weapons, Ukraine," while looking at a few Western weapons, and it is just a few. Ukraine uses the grain corridor for illegal arms trade, something they cannot and have not even tried to prove. That Rustem Umerov is using his connections in the Arab world for illegal arms trades. Again, they're trying to hit on the ability of them to get Western assistance. And there are people who are going to eat it up. And of course, Lebanon opening of the market for Ukrainian agricultural product is used for illegal arms. This is really just trying to stop weapons from flowing into Ukraine from partners. And yet they don't provide any proof of any of these statements, and I have seen none. Mindset for Russia. Before the war, you were a prisoner's wife, and that's if your prisoner has been, taken to the war in Ukraine. And when your husband dies, you are a hero's wife. How can they... trying to basically put lipstick on a pig by saying that your status as a widow is improved by sending your prisoner off to war and having him killed. It's just insane. I can't wrap my head around it. Russia says a nuclear facility in Kursk was hit by a Ukrainian drone with damage to the wall. Doesn't this sound pretty familiar to what just happened to a nuclear facility in Ukraine, where a Russian asset exploded nearby and blew out the windows on a bunch of the windows of that nuclear power plant. This looks to me like a disinformation operation, at least at right now. Phil, yes. Let's see. Does Russia's satellite system not detect the no shadows thing? Who knows? I don't know. I do know that by and large, Russian drone camera sensors are not as good as Western camera sensors on drones. So they might think that they're not able to see it on their drone sensors, and it would probably have the same effect on Ukrainian drones. It's possible some of the drones that are in use do not have high quality optics, but most of them have decent quality. You'd be able to tell the difference. I thought this was interesting. I actually caught Covert Cabal's YouTube video on this, a new count of the Russian tanks in storage. They're now only, let's see, let's go and scroll down. We can show what that looks like there. And no, this isn't a video, it's just a picture. This is the number in storage and showing how many have been pulled out. T-55s, they've pulled out to, they've basically how many are in storage here. They've pulled out a bunch of them in each of these cases with the exception of T-64. So let's kind of go through what Richard Veriker says about that. T-90s, these 50 T-90s they're still showing in storage are very old T-90s that haven't been modernized. So therefore, if they haven't been taken out of storage yet, they probably can't be due to lacking parts, unable to actually get them running, those types of things, literally rusted away, those types of problems. T-80s, Russia is still producing T-80s, but it's at a very low level. So they seem to slow down in the summer, and only 32 were removed from storage in the last 6 months. So this seems to be about right. We're not seeing as many T-80s on the front right now. T-72s, they've taken 106 out of storage in the last 6 months versus 180 confirmed losses in that time. It's still going to be the main tank because, as I recall, they have they still got 1,700 of them. T-64s, Russia never actually produced T-64s. They were made in a Ukrainian plant. So any T-64s we're seeing on, being used on the front lines are captured from Ukraine, which should tell you how desperate they are to use them. T-62s are now coming into the conflict in Ukraine at greater numbers. But at the rate they're removing them, they pulled 198 out. They're going to be down to 0 in 11 months, assuming they're all repairable. That said, they think they're going mostly to training and second line roles. T-55s, 52 of these out of the tanks, but 52 of these out of the storage, but only one lost at the front. So again, maybe they can get them to the repair factory, but can't actually repair them. So they could just be being used for training, or they just might not be able to get them running. And basically, we're looking at a situation where they're drawing down their stocks of tanks to try and sustain the war effort in Ukraine. More about not shooting down the ATACMS. And then there was this phrasing of it. The 2 ATACMS missiles were destroyed as a result of a direct hit on the position of the Russian Armed Forces Air Defense Group in the Luhansk region at the cost of 3 S-400 systems deployed there. That's the Russians doing their own tongue-in-cheek commentary about destroying these ATACMS missiles. Pretty hilarious. All right, so I'm going to take a brief pause at this moment before going through the international. Are there any questions real quick? I have been watching what you guys have been saying and reading your comments. I appreciate them absolutely. Makes the stream more fun, for one thing. Russia shot down 2 ATACMS the way my buddy Bob blocked 2 punches drunk in a bar. Yeah, with his face. There's just so much going on over there that you just can't really get into. And before we move on to the international stuff, if you've been paying attention to Israel, and this is only a brief drop over there, so we're not talking about Israel as a whole. Overnight, there was a massive incursion into Gaza, all across the north end. 3 different incursion points, tanks and troops entered. The Hamas has said that the Israelis took losses and tremendous losses. At one point, even saying they used 6 ATGMs to destroy 30 tanks. Entertaining, nice math. I'd love to see where they get a 5 tanks to 1 ATGM ratio and how they do that. Israel initially said this was not the promised ground offensive, that it was just one more temporary assault. But a later statement by the Israeli Minister of Defense said that this is the next phase of the operation, and that they will not. This phase will not be over until they say it's done. So the current assault into Gaza, as of when I looked it up about an hour and a half ago, may be the start of the actual ground offensive into Gaza. Don't know that yet. They may still pull back once they've accomplished whatever their tasks are right now. But that's kind of the quick summary of what's going on in Israel right now. Let's move over to the international in Ukraine, for Ukraine, I should say. Viktor Orban is saying that he wants a Ukrainian delegation to come to Budapest for negotiations before the next tranche of aid from the European Union gets sent. He wants something. He's already been working with Russia to try and slow down everything he can. This looks like another delaying tactic. I don't know what he thinks he's going to get out of it, because I can't imagine he can ask for anything that Ukraine can give. The UK and other allies are giving additional air defense systems and demining equipment. The artillery situation is becoming gradually more difficult. The EU has promised 1 million artillery shells, but only 300,000 have been delivered so far. North Korea just handed over 350,000 units of ammunition to Russia. There's going to need a lot more resources if they're going to outperform Russia at this point in time. On top of that, the U.S. has just redirected some 155 millimeter artillery shells to Israel, meaning that those stocks will no longer be available for Ukraine, and with no word on how they're going to backfill that to support Ukraine's counteroffensive. Slovakia's new prime minister has said that he will not support military aid to Ukraine and has been blocking that aid in the EU as well. The U.S., Japan, and South Korea have issued an official joint condemnation of arms shipments from North Korea to Russia. They were already under sanctions. This just is kind of rubbing salt into the wound. And at last, Ukrainian pilots have begun actually getting behind the stick in F-16s in Arizona. So they're actually getting flying capabilities in F-16s at last. This is initial flight familiarization. They're trying to get into the planes and actually control them to see how things are different from controlling the Russian equipment they're already familiar with. But it's the first real point at which they're getting their hands on F-16s so that they can actually become flight proficient with them directly in the air. Italian Prime Minister Giorgia Meloni has been very vocal about her support for Ukraine lately. And she says they are not only looking at the present, but also at a peaceful European future for Ukraine. She's been really on fire lately about supporting Ukraine. A lot of her critics have called her some kind of right-wing nut job, but if so, she is totally supporting Ukraine right now and going all in to try and make sure they're getting the support they need. Denmark is donating another $522 million worth of equipment, including tanks, IFVs, artillery, drones, and small arms. That was already talking about Orban again. We talked about him already. Another $150 million in assistance from the U.S., including NASAMS, AIM-9Ms, Stingers, HIMARS, TOWs, Javelins, and more artillery shells. They're making sure they're getting some 105 millimeter artillery rounds in there as well. Don't know what they actually have. Let me see. Ukraine 105 millimeter artillery. Okay, there we go. What is the situation? And now you're seeing me researching on the fly to get information together. Of course, they're already doing 155. Ukraine has received 72 105 millimeter howitzers, 36 from the U.S., 36 from the U.K., and some from Lithuania. And they started the war with 1,150 Soviet era howitzers, but not in the 105 millimeter. Now, as I recall, going off of memory here, is that 105 millimeter is shorter range, less capable, of course, than 155. But if they've got the barrels to shoot it, they can absolutely make use of that. It will be closer in than their familiar 155. But they were already using a bunch of Russian equipment that was already shorter range. So this is just more artillery shells are able to make use of. That's what I think I'm remembering, is that there's some older French guns as well. So they've got the ability to use it. It's just a matter of getting the ammunition to do so. So there we go. Let's see. The M777 is not currently in production, huh? Interesting. I wonder if they're going to fire the production line for that. So yeah, they've got a tracked howitzer and the M119, the 105 millimeter howitzers. They've got options here is what it comes down to. And that's just a way to keep them in the fight. All good. So you already talked about that. Lukashenko's also talking World War III, though his response to the news of it's World War III is about to ignite is, ladies, go make babies, build houses, get pregnant, get married, have children. You know, this is it may be true that they're going to need those families to be expanding, but what they always forget is that in this time of uncertainty, it's a lot harder to want to bring children into the world. So you need to provide hope. You need to provide that something that gives them a future they can look forward to. And right now, just telling them to get pregnant and have babies is not providing them with hope. There needs to be a message here that there is a future that you want to bring kids into. Not one where it's like World War III is starting and we're going to blow the whole place up. Let's see. Oh, yes. Orban's commentary in his meeting with Vladimir Putin is basically just disrespecting Ukrainian soldiers, according to the Prime Minister of Luxembourg, Xavier Bettel. He stated it is a middle finger to all the soldiers who die every day in Ukraine and suffer from the Russian attack. There's been a lot of worry about the new House Speaker, Michael Johnson. Up until his election to the speakership, he was pretty well negative on Ukraine aid. But something's changed. And I think one of the things that changed was he started getting the briefings, the abbreviated but high-level briefings that people who are directly in the immediate chain of replacements for the president do get. As a Speaker of House, that makes him number 2 in line for the presidency. If President Biden, for some reason, couldn't fill the role, if Kamala Harris was somehow unable to fulfill the role, he would then become president. So he's receiving at least an abbreviated version of the wider briefings that President Biden and Kamala Harris would receive. So I wonder if he started receiving those briefings, and that's what maybe changed his position. Or the other possibility is that when he was in the middle of his speakership bid and they were trying to unite the conference, he had to make some concessions. That said, the phrasing he's using does not look like somebody who's functioning as concessions. He's changed his tune. He said that the United States cannot allow Putin to win in Ukraine and that Russia's victory may encourage and empower China in relation to Taiwan. I will point out that it also encourages Iran in regards to Israel. It encourages some of the crazies over in South America, some of the dictators down there, to get into their expansionist goals. It definitely encourages some of the dictators down in Africa to expand their goals there, and it encourages, shall we say, the potential dictators. It encourages potential dictators to jump in and potentially overthrow their governments. This is encouraging instability across the world, as the response to Ukraine took so long to start to ramp up. And he said that aid to Ukraine will require greater accountability. He means accountants, people who are going to just follow it and make sure it's going to where it needs to go. That said, currently my understanding is that things are pretty good as far as accountability in Ukraine. They've got people watching to make sure the weapons are going where they need to go. They're making sure that bribes and graft are kept to a minimum. So the greater accountability I've seen has been basically another layer of accounting. Somebody else who is watching, basically somebody who's counting the counters, for lack of a better way to say it. Super Inspector General. I'm not opposed to additional accountability for the U.S. As far as watching that goes. There's tremendous amounts of corruption in the U.S. Procurement systems that really needs to be taken out. If we're going to successfully sustain combat operations in multiple theaters of war, we need to have patriots in those positions who will say no to overpaying for equipment, who will say no to bribes and graft, who will look at the defense contractors and say, no, you will put it out there at the right price so that we can buy it, instead of taking advantage of our systems to make more money and steal more from the American taxpayers. But that's a personal opinion. That's what I think is what it should. That's what that accountability should be. Destroying corruption in our systems. And if we did so, we would not only get more bang for our buck, but would be a better country for it. And that's my lecture for today on accountability in military acquisitions. That's just really it, is that we as a whole, as a nation and as a people, need to be more accountable, not just to our government, and more accountable to our people, but more accountable to ourselves, to be honorable and honest in our dealings with our fellow man, and accountable to the people who pay for this, the American taxpayer in our case, the Canadian taxpayer up there in Canada, you guys over in Europe, same thing. There you go. Now let's see. Now I just need to find a public office to run for right there. That's my stump speech right there. Oh, gee. Okay. More seriously, that's everything from the international standpoint. The next step is to go into the front lines as I understand them. Well, thank you, Phil. I appreciate that. 12,000. See, Stinger was 12,000 in the 90s and 110,000 today. The tech is more expensive, but tech is also cheaper as it progresses. It costs less to make things as we get more used to making them. Yes, I mean, there is a certain amount of inflation that happens. It should not cost, 10 times. It should not cost 10 times as much to make a piece of equipment that we've known how to make for decades. Each decade should result in a reduction in cost as it relates to the same piece of equipment as it inflates in as the dollar or whatever inflates in value. So these numbers should match. It should be more expensive if inflation's been that high, but it should be less expensive as the production lines have gotten more efficient, more capable, and cheaper ways have been determined to do the same thing. So that's kind of the situation there. Any other questions before I move on to the front lines, which is a little bit shorter section today? Like I said, if you have not seen the video over on Geopolitics Daily, you'll want to go and get that just to get your catch up for a lot of the things going on the front lines. This will be a kind of stepping forward a little bit. No major changes, but I think there's some good information in here. Running for office in the Great White North. Well, I'd have to become a Canadian citizen at that point, and the only time I've ever been to Canada was when I spent about a few hours there over at the Niagara Falls as a tourist. And I don't think that's a good way to know what the needs of Canada are compared to how well I know U.S. politics. I think that somebody who is going to be an advocate for Canadians needs to be somebody who has been there long enough to understand not just Canadian politics, but Canadians as a whole. Much like I don't really want somebody moving here from, I don't know, an African country and the next day running for senator. Because I just don't think they'll have the same connection with the people that they're representing. But, it's a thought. But that would be a long-term thing. Because I'd want to really know the people of Canada like I know the people here. If that makes sense. And I think that's true of anybody. Oh, thank you, Phil. I appreciate that. All right, so we're going to move on to the front lines here. Let's go ahead and move back to showing what's going on here. Now, I've got the map up right now, but I'm going to quickly run through the documents, and then we'll come back to the map. Okay, so Russia is Avdiivka. The whole situation at Avdiivka. Over the last few days, they have probably taken relative control over the slag heap, basically the bit of high ground, and they're trying to make a push into the Avdiivka coke plant and take some of the buildings there. That's going to be a real problem for Avdiivka if they do so. But they are losing equipment at tremendous rates in Avdiivka. A lot of complaints about the worsening situation in Avdiivka. They're hoping to establish that foothold in that coke plant building north there and are trying to push south, but they're finding that there's a lot of resistance to their maneuvers there. Russia's lost at least 125 armored vehicles. That's from 2 days ago, a statement by National Security spokesman John Kirby. So that's reasonably recent. From Anton Heroshenko, the Russians are suffering the largest equipment losses and personnel losses in 2023 near Avdiivka. They are reported to have deployed up to 8 brigades in the area. And even the Russian war correspondents are saying that no chance, this is awful. They're getting meat assaults being promoted by their command. Some have even gone so far as to say there's been a no retreat order placed that they are not going to allow anybody who comes back to live. and blocking troops. I don't know how accurate those things are. That's just the reports I'm seeing. But by and large, bodies are the one thing that Russia never is afraid to lose. So a lot of stuff going on in that area. It's not pretty. A destroyed field ammo site, which I believe to be in that area, but I've not had that confirmed. The numbers we're seeing now out of the Secretary of Defense and Minister Umarov, this is from today, so there's at least 4,000 people lost for the Russians near Avdiivka. That's a lot of guys. That really is. See, this is from yesterday. Russian attacks on Avdiivka continue. No notable changes in who's holding what scene. And the Ukrainian forces do continue to do their raids over in Kherson over the Dnieper. Now, here's some actual numbers for the number of people. Avdiivka offensive equipment lost numbers as of the 27th of October, 157 armored vehicles lost. Let me see, what does this look like if I pop this up? I don't think that's going to work. Nope, it's not. Let me see. Give me a second here. I'm going to flip this back to... Good. Do that, and bear with me a second while I make some adjustments here. I want you to see what's going on with that. We're just going to have to move this over. And now we can go back to here. And... Boop. Okay. You should see now the whole chart. That is the 43 tanks, 98 armored fighting vehicles, 8 infantry fighting vehicles, an MLRS, 3 self-propelled artillery, 3 engineering vehicles, a truck. That's between destroyed, abandoned, and damaged. And destroyed is the lion's share of these numbers. So really, they're basically putting the screws to the Russians in this area. These are recent losses in this area. Aren't more of stuff being lost in this area by Russia than they did anywhere else we've seen so far. Okay, now I'm going to go ahead and move my screen back to where it was, so I'll be prepared for the next few things. Get it? Come on. Sometimes it's a little bit small right now, so it's a little bit of a jiggle to try and get things just right. Okay, you think that'll work for now? And we go back to here. Boop. There we go. So Russia's losing a lot of equipment in Avdiivka. Moving over to Verbova for a moment or two. The Russians are complaining about being attacked there as well. The enemy spares no ammunition and has been relentlessly destroying all tree lines and frontline strong points for 2 days, to some small losses on their part, according to the Russians. They're still trying to do a reconnaissance in force under the cover of artillery. They say that the Ukrainians are less experienced than the Russian armed forces, but they have enormous amounts of artillery to work over Verbova area. And then they call the Ukrainians fascists. Yeah, you can tell they're ticked off when they start just basically insulting the Ukrainians outright. Oh yeah, I mean, that's absolutely right, Phil. If they just go home, they wouldn't have to worry about being attacked. It's not their territory. Now let's look at the situation on the left bank of the Dnieper River really briefly here. The more sabotage groups being discovered. They claim they stopped one group by shooting at their fast boat. And the Ukrainians continue to keep trying to cross the Dnieper and gain a foothold. This is sophisticated. They use an artillery raid to distract the Russians and then rush at all speed into the channels and get into the areas that they can control. Or they use bad weather, and so they talk themselves up for a little bit. War Gonzo, this is a Russian source here, just so we're clear, is continuing to report that there are battles near Poima, Peshenivka, and Podstepna, and Krinky. Then he talks about Zaporizhia area, which is Verbova in that area, Kopani and Rivne with the Ukrainians attack, and they're working the flanks. And Donetsk, lots more meat assaults in that area, and some small amounts of progress. So there we go. That's the reported sources. And now we can just take a look at the map for a little bit and talk it over. Move it over here. Let's see. Did I forget to change? Boop. And boop. And yeah, that's where we want to be right there. And just queue up this. Sorry, I'm just doing a little bit of... One of the disadvantages of doing this by yourself is that you have to do all the button pushing on the fly. Okay, so let's pop into the Dnieper real quick here. And pop that. Oh. Hang on a second. I got to get my draw on my screen stuff back up. There we go. Okay, so they're saying that the Ukrainians have been successfully pushing across the river and getting into Podstepna, Poima, and Pishkanivka. Where'd it go? Sorry, my cursor somewhat disappears when I do this, so I'm having to do it effectively almost blind. The Russians, on the other hand, have been countering and fighting in all three of these areas. That is an awful-looking arrow, but I think you get the point. And Podstepna. Same thing going on in Krinky over here, with the Ukrainians are actually effectively dug into Krinky. So they look like they may be intending to stay it out for a while in this area. The Russians have been pushing in to try and counter with minimal luck so far from all the reports I've been seeing. So while there's activity in both areas here, the advantage for the Ukrainians seem to be primarily in this Krinky area to the northeast, and with a lot more of the combat going on down near the Podstepna, Pishtanivka, and Poima areas. Moving over to Verbova. Let's get Kopani in here because that's kind of the major spot. That should be right there on the edge. Man, I can't even read that. Sorry, I'm having to look at a teeny tiny version of what I'm doing to see where the map looks like. Okay, Kopani over here. Ukraine has continued to make additional progress on the flanks towards Kopani. Not a lot. I mean, we're not talking, this arrow is way exaggerated. And same thing in this area here. Nova Prokopivka, again, appears to be mostly static right now, with neither side seeming to make significant gains in the last few days. There's still additional reports of Ukraine making progress towards Nova Fedorivka, along this area here, and additional progress towards Verbova along in here. And we're still watching the whole situation. The Russian forces primarily are making their attempts to get through near Verbova in this area right about in here and about over here. So these are not unopposed advances. This is just kind of where the progress is. And my understanding is that the Russians are primarily in this area right here to counter the moves near Nova Fedorivka or Nova Prokofka. That's the area right there. Now let's flip over. We're going to kind of skip over a lot of this area here because Avdiivka is the next hot spot. And at this point, we're seeing that the Russians are not making significant progress on the south end over here. They're trying to make progress, but they're mostly getting kind of diverted more towards Pervomaisk instead. On the north end, though, they're still making some level of progress. This is that slag heap right here that we've been talking about that they have not quite captured. It's no longer under Ukraine's control. The Russians are able to get up there and use it, but they're not able to stay up there at this point. They really want to make the progress, though, towards Stepova more like here. But so far, they're being blocked by Ukrainians working the area here. Now, the main, basically, they have the Ukrainians have effective fighting positions all throughout Avdiivka area here. So they're fighting from their best and most effective fighting positions, well fortified and that type of thing. That said, Russia is throwing the bodies in, and they are making marginal progress every time they do so. And that's the type of situation we're seeing in Avdiivka. Okay, for Special Forces versus Armored Troops, the Russians really do suck. Yep, that's a good summary of the situation there. That's the front lines. Brief pause here. See if there's anything new coming through. Phil, thank you very much for being here. Absolutely. And Giannis of Avalon, or is it Janice or Giannis of Avalon? I just need to know if it's a hard J or a soft J. Let me know in the comments, because I want to say that right for you. Glad to have you here as well. Hard, so Janice of Avalon. Awesome. Glad to have you here. You go by either one. I got you. I'm with you. So overall, we're looking at a pretty big situation in Ukraine. There have been signs of progress, and overall with the situation, Ukraine still has the upper hand, at least as far as making progress. The last couple of things we have are not combat related, but are just fun ads. Let's go ahead and flip back over for you. If you ever get a parking ticket, oh, hold on. I got to refresh the screen here. Bloop. If you ever get a parking ticket, hope that this crow or this bird is there for you, because he's taking the violation, the ticket right off the windshield and messing with it. Maybe he'll take care of the fines too. Does he fly away? I don't remember. Yep, he flies away with the ticket. So pretty hilarious, if you ask me. I thought that was fun. And here is a butterfly that has landed on a Ukrainian soldier. You can see he's just really chuffed about it too. And it's a live butterfly. That is not a decal or a sticker. He's wandering around and just enjoying himself on the Ukrainian flag on this man's shoulder patch. And that's everything I have got for you for today. Really, the situation in Israel is heating up. The situation in Ukraine is steady progress. I've been trying to keep current on everything going on around the world, so I can add in little tidbits that I'm noticing. And overall, it's just keeping on. I think that the situation with the Speaker Johnson, as far as Ukraine goes, it looks like that's going to be a positive instead of a negative in the end. I am cautiously optimistic. And the rest of everything else, I just want you to know that I appreciate every single one of you who drops in and says hi or catches this later. At this point, just a reminder to hit that thumbs up. Hit me with that thumbs up if you enjoyed today's video. And 100%, share it with somebody that you want to keep current with the Ukraine war. I do try and provide positive comments for any of the sources I use. Reminder that I do make heavy use of the deep state map, and I appreciate their efforts to provide information about the Ukraine war. And I watch the comments and everything that comes through, and want you to know that I do still believe that the Ukraine war is important to keep up with, and is probably to a certain extent is the linchpin of what's going on in the world right now. And unfortunately, it appears that the world has moved beyond the point where we could have stopped much of what's going on by stopping the Russians in Ukraine. Even so, it remains a linchpin to the situation, and stamping out the situation in Ukraine will have a tremendous effect on the rest of the conflicts that are going on in the world, in my opinion. And that's everything for today. Again, thank you again for joining me. I do appreciate it. And you guys have a great rest of your day. We'll see you on the next stream.